There was a point in time where it seemed like there was a Star Wars game coming out every week. While the movies haven't exactly stopped printing money, I don't think they've ever reached the unhinged heights that the Star Wars marketing machine did in the early 2000s. They were really pushing the prequels hard, and how that turned out is ancient history at this point. But despite how the films themselves did, the creative license given to developers did allow for some great games to come out of it. Some kicking off whole franchises that most people have heard of, and some staying relatively niche but still remembered. That isn't to say that they were all winners though. For every Republic Commando and KOTOR there was an Obi-Wan or a Star Wars Kinect. Going down the list, it was weird how many of these games I remembered. Either having owned them, seen them on demo discs, or renting them. One of the ones I remember playing most that wasn't Battlefront though was Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which that title has always annoyed me. And it always messes me up when I Google it, because I always type Star Wars Pod Racer, since it's snappier, you assume that's what they called it, but no, that's the full title. Supposedly this was because there was already a game series with Pod in the title that they didn't want to get into a copyright scuffle with, but I have a suspicion this is only half the truth. It's true there is a racing game from 1997 called Pod, but knowing how big the Star Wars brand is, and how soullessly marketing departments fawn over the two gods of brand recognition and brand equity, I have a feeling the choice was made to make it a subtitle because that colon means Grandma can pick it out of a Tesco bargain bin to give to little Timmy, because she likely knows what a Star Wars is. I have no proof of this obviously, it's just something I suspect. They did the same thing with Total Warhammer years later. I usually make it a rule not to review anything I have a strong attachment to. A tangential connection is fine, but Star Wars Pod Racer is one of the first games I have vivid memories of playing, and it was definitely the first racing game I ever played. I didn't own an N64, so I didn't play Mario Kart until I was well into my teens, and I didn't own a GameCube either, so I never played F-Zero. I suppose I could have been playing Wipeout, but Wipeout marketed itself a little differently in the UK. It was marketing itself to ravers that had been awake for 3 days straight, and had admittedly sick but confusing box art that wasn't exactly going to attract kids, or moreover the parents of those kids. I mean, the game had the Chemical Brothers and Orbital on the soundtrack. It knew the crowd it was going to attract and went all in on it, and it's great. Christ, I've used its soundtrack in the background of most of these videos and it's been playing this whole time. But what I mean is that I wouldn't actually play it until years later. I bring up Wipeout as well because Pod Racer was an answer to a very simple question. How do we take the only good scene besides Duel of the Fates out of this movie that everyone hates and make a game out of it? You copy the formula from popular AG racing games and give it a Star Wars makeover. I mentioned in the Mashed review that I only like racing games so long as they don't have normal cars in them. I'll pass on a realistic recreation of the Nuremberg Ring and an accurate Toyota Corolla physics model, but make that Corolla float 6 feet off the ground and make noises like... then I'm in. Since then, that has changed a little, but only because of Ridge Racer R4 and its impossibly smooth soundtrack. But Pod Racer did more than it needed to. It had the Star Wars brand, so it could have just phoned it in like a lot of tie-ins out there, and gotten its money back. But there's a reason it got a HD re-release, and there's a reason people still talk about it now and then. Pod Racer is good. It's a smooth, fun racing game that takes all the things that were cool about the pod racing scene and translates that experience really well for the most part, although there's not enough of it. The game has a total of 3 tournaments with 7 races to each, along with a special invitation-only tournament that'll show up about midway through the game. There's no story, no actual cutscenes beyond an intro video, and the text scroll is only 3 paragraphs long. You just race. You can play the tournaments in any order, although a stock pod racer won't be very well equipped for the later races, but it's not impossible to beat them. The manual saying it has 25 unique courses is a little bit sneaky since they're mostly just remixes. There are basically only 8 flavours of map that get their bits moved about, and some are more drastic than others. This doesn't bother me much though, as all the tracks are well thought out and fun to race on, so I never found myself getting bored of any of them. Then again, you can beat this game in an afternoon, so I guess there isn't really enough time for it to bore you. You'll also have to pick your pod racer. You get 6 to start with, which goes up to 23 by the end of the game, and they're all really well done. The models have aged, but there's some genuine attention given to making sure that all these pods got translated over into the game, and they all have their own individual stats. Don't worry about the stats though, as they fall by the wayside quickly. The game wants you to pick Anakin first since he has the most balanced stats out of any of the starting races, but you should be picking Gazgano. Ironically, if you want to have the fastest pod racer, it's pretty much required for you to pick someone other than Anakin by mid-game, since you're better off picking a racer with better base stats in speed and then buying upgrades for them to even it out. Which means I've just saved the galaxy by min-maxing. Anakin loses the boon to Classic and dies on Tatooine, where's my medal? When it comes to actually racing though, the game doesn't take much to pick up and learn. If you've played a racing game, you'll likely know what to do. Accelerate, brake, and turn. Although there are some mechanics that I should mention. The first is boosting. Boosting is essential if you want to finish the game, and is the only way to reach your top speed. While holding down the acceleration, a little bar will fill up at the bottom of the screen. Once it's full, you can hit a boost that will carry on as long as you hold it down. But eventually you'll start to overheat, and if you hold it down even longer, your engine will catch fire or explode. Braking in this game might sound like it's self-explanatory, but that changes when you bring in upgrades. Throughout the game you'll earn Trugots. A Trugot was a form of currency used by the Hutts on Tatooine. A Trugot was the equivalent of 10 credits, or 16 golden whoopee, while 4 Trugots equaled 1 Pegat, which normally exchanged for roughly 40 credits. I think my nose is bleeding. These Trugots let you buy parts for your pod racer, which you'll need eventually, but you can go through most of the first 2 tournaments without even touching the shop. You have a choice between Watto's shop, which will sell the best items at full price, and the junkyard, which will sell items at a reduced cost, but with the caveat that there's less choice, it's on a random rotation, and the parts will likely need repairing. This is where braking comes in. Here's a little bit of a secondary school physics lesson for anyone like me who just doubled down on speed without thinking about upgrading anything else. Objects in motion require an equal or greater force of opposing energy to slow them down. So if you go wild on upgrading your speed and leave your brakes stock, then you've essentially just put a V8 on a shopping cart. So you need to invest evenly. Though, to be honest, you can just get away with just increasing speed for the most part, provided you leave enough time to make it round corners. The funniest part about this upgrade system though is that you can upgrade traction. Why the fuck do I need to worry about traction in a vehicle that hovers? This gets even stranger when you factor in that these pod racers go slower over rough terrain, they can skid on ice, and you can power slide them. That brings me to the control scheme, which is easy to pick up for the most part. This game supported a keyboard, flight stick and gamepad control schemes, and picked up my controller with no issue, which surprised me given how scuffed the game tends to be on modern PCs. It is entirely possible to finish this game on the keyboard, and it's not as terrible as you might think. I've done it as well a few years ago on a laptop. I used a standard controller since I wasn't about to break the bank on a flight stick for this game that may or may not work, but you may have to remap a few things depending on the controller you use. For the most part, the scheme is pretty bog standard. You turn and you brake, but Pod Racer introduces a few additional mechanics. For one, you can turn 90 degrees onto your side. This is used in a couple of races to fit through small gaps and take certain shortcuts, though these are relatively few. Boosting is another mechanic which is vital to finishing the game, but also just integral to getting the most out of your pod racer. As I said earlier, if you hold it down for too long, your engines will explode, but the game will let you know when you're overheating by the beeping sound you hear. Just leave them to cool down until you can do it again. It's kind of like you have 2 accelerators. One just pushes you forward like normal, while the other one gradually charges up your boost, and you have to be holding both at the same time, otherwise it won't charge. It takes a little getting used to, but once you master it, a good well-timed boost can feel surprisingly satisfying. Your engines will get damaged though, and making repairs to your pod racer mid-race comes into play more later in the game, once fire hazards start appearing. Since your engine can catch fire, while it's on fire you won't be able to boost and the pod racer will start to pull to the side. If you leave it without doing anything, it will eventually explode. To put out fires and repair your engines, you'll need to buy pit droids. I didn't buy pit droids until the last Tatooine map where the Tusken Raiders show up, and was confused as to why I couldn't put it out at first. These pit droids also factor into the degradation mechanic. As you race and crash into stuff, your engines will take damage. If your engines lose health, the more likely they are to explode completely the next time you take a hit. Here's where this mechanic kind of falls apart though, as the AI in this game is not the best. So you'll be spending most of your time miles in front of anybody, so respawning really doesn't pose much of a threat, especially since you respawn with your engine integrity back at full. This does affect the total repair level of your items through all races though, as your pod racer parts will have a health system that requires you to spend money on repairs. I'm not entirely sure what this system does though, as I played this game like someone handed the controller to a fucking chimp. I was not careful and abused the respawning over pit droids, and never had trouble finishing the game. Again, I didn't even buy the droids until I was 80% into the game, and even then it was only to put out engine fires, not to actually repair them. You can't cause damage to your parts by doing races you've already completed, which is nice, but given the fact that you can't grind money from a race you've already completed either, there's very little reason to replay races beyond trying to beat your own times. This is also a bit of a double-edged sword because of the repair mechanic, but also the way you earn cash in this game. Pit droids can't repair outside of races you've already completed for some reason, so unless you repair right on the last race, you can be stuck with non-perfect parts permanently. With money, you earn cash by completing races, but before each race you can pick an amount that you'd like to play for. The easiest and middle setting will reward you with a pretty piss poor amount of money depending on your position between 4th and 1st, with the final option being winner takes all, which nets you a large winning but only if you come in first. The problem with this is that most people are going to be trying to finish first anyway, and you don't get another chance to do these races for prize money again, so you can lock yourself out of having the necessary amount of money to fully upgrade for the endgame pod. So why the fuck would you ever want to pick anything other than winner takes all? It's really easy to miss this option as well if you're just going through the menus, and it sets the medium option by default. I could understand this system if I couldn't also just press retry race if I failed. Maybe if there was a mode that let you wager an amount of money on the winning in a difficult race that you couldn't back out of, it would make sense, but as it is, I don't really see why this option is here. You'll want the maximum amount possible too, as it's the only way to really get how fast this game can be. For a while, this was the fastest racing game I had ever played. That title has since been taken, but as a child staring at this game through the CRT of the family computer at what was most definitely not the optimal frame rate, this game felt like being tied to the front of the Shinkansen. The game knew that speed was its main attraction and says as much on its box art and promotional material. You'll see it boast a simulated 600 miles an hour, which as a child I thought, ah yeah, cool speed, but looking at it now, isn't that kind of ridiculous for a vehicle like this? For context, the speed of the fastest commercial trains in the world right now sit at just underneath 400 miles an hour, and that's over a noticeable period of acceleration. I think the Concorde could go near 600 miles an hour, and fighter jets can go even faster than that, but people need a shitload of training and conditioning before they're able to fly a fighter jet and not black out. These pod races are reaching max speed in about 10 seconds, and decelerating to a full stop even faster than that. I'm not going to attempt the maths here, since there's a reason I spent my school years in the little annex classrooms that they like to quarantine the slower kids in, so no one has to look at you. But to use a real-world example, Colonel John Stepp tested the effects of G-force on the human body in the 40s and 50s by accelerating to just over 600 miles an hour on a rocket sled, and he did not come out of it looking okay. He would suffer fractured bones, an abdominal hernia, and hemorrhages in his eyes, even going temporarily blind after one run. Midichlorians might increase reaction times, but is there anything in the wiki about them not turning your brain into soup? It's been dated now by other racing games, but you can still reach some terrifying speeds in this game. And if you want to hit the top speed and feel like you're in that famous Maxell ad, you're not just going to have to unlock Sebulba. You're also going to have to upgrade Sebulba's pod to really get the full effect. As you progress, you'll unlock more pods and, by extension, their races. The cutscene that plays each time you win one has the character model still stuck in the cockpit, so it looks like you win the racer as well as the pod. Sebulba is the last character you unlock, and the base stats are already pretty terrifying. When I first fired this up for the video though, I'd been upgrading my pod as I went along and sparing no expense. So by the time I unlocked Sebulba's pod, I didn't actually have the money to upgrade it, and since you can't grind past races, I was stuck with the base stats. It's then that I realised a crucial thing. We can go faster. So I started a fresh file and stuffed the cash under the mattress like a Hollywood celebrity who knows he's going to have to leave the country very quickly at some point if anyone ever finds the C drive. I upgraded only the bare minimum, which in retrospect made the AI almost challenging for once. I beat Sebulba as best I could with as little as I could, just to make sure I had enough money. And once I had it, I set about upgrading everything with the best parts money could buy. This thing isn't even classed as a pod racer anymore. It's a cruise missile with a cockpit. In terms of presentation, this game has aged. I can't deny that, but overall there are so many peaks and valleys to the way this game is put together that it's a bit like a game design canyon. For the most part, things are convincingly Star Wars. Each pod racer has a very defined shape, and it's easy enough to tell them apart that you could probably be able to tell which one is which by silhouette alone. Each pod racer also handles differently with its base sets, but that soon goes away as you'll be upgrading them to be great in everything. So by the end of the game, all the pod racers are going to feel the same no matter what. The other issue is that not all the pod racers were treated the same. Some will have little animations for air brakes, while others don't. Some will be easily piloted from the front view, while others will have the engines take up the majority of the screen, making using this view pointless. The environments themselves aren't the most detailed, but they are good maps. I don't think there was a single race that I thought was irritating or boring, although the most trouble I had was with the sky maps, because if you fall off this platform, you won't be able to catch up because of how long of a detour it takes you on. Visually, there seems to have been a focus on making each one different. So you get different environments like jungles, deserts, oceans, lava, or space. It is disappointing that there aren't more individually different tracks instead of the track remixes, but it's not too bad. These planets might not be high fidelity, but they do feel convincingly alien, and a lot of the tracks can have a really nice warm feel to them, though that might be a product of nostalgia as much as the art direction. It's in the same vein as something like Rayman 2 or Half-Life, where no matter how abstract the levels are, I could see people living here and think about the world outside of the track. Like, what goes on in these buildings? Obviously nothing, it's a flat mesh hiding a void behind it, but the speculation is the key. I don't want to see the world outside of these areas, I just want to think about it. Again, nostalgia is probably doing the heavy lifting for me there, so you could be looking at this for the first time and thinking that I'm talking out my arse. While the atmosphere is there visually though, it's hamstringed by the sound design. The most disappointing part of the sound design is that every single pod racer in the game sounds exactly the same. I could forgive that if the one sound was good, but it just sounds like someone left a hairdryer on. This is especially disappointing as the pod racing scene is famous for having some fucking good sound design. Every pod racer sounds fast and powerful, and the sound dopplers around the environment, crashes are sudden and violent, and sell how dangerous pod racing is better than the clunky foreshadowing that Qui-Gon gives it. And each pod racer has a recognisable sound palette. I'm willing to bet most of the people watching this know what Sebulba's pod racer sounds like. It's like a mix between a vintage tractor starting up in sub-zero temperatures and an asthmatic motorboating. But in the game, Sebulba's pod sounds exactly the same as all the others. Sound design has changed a lot in games, and getting sound design comparable to the movie just wasn't going to happen in '99. But at least having some form of variation in the sounds for each racer would have been nice. The sound issues aren't just restricted to the pod races either. The sound in general can be a little, sparse. To give you an example, I'm going to quickly play the opening animation and the menu sounds for you. This is unedited footage. That isn't a bug. The whole menu for this game is eerily silent, save for the select noise. Given that this is a bar, I sort of half expected the cantina theme to play in the background, or for there to be a little bit of ambient foley, like people talking and drinks being moved around, but no, there's absolutely nothing. I have to wonder if there just wasn't enough time to do proper sound work for this, because I can't imagine this went through a team of people and no one said, "Doesn't the main menu feel kind of creepy with no audio?" What's strange is that there are little hints of some sound work being done. Like when you fly through an area with a crowd stand, you can hear cheers that fade in and out. But besides this, I can't think of any other times the maps had anything beyond a basic Atmos track for the whole level. Granted, you aren't going to be sat still quietly taking in the scenery in this game, but sound design sells speed well. Hearing objects in the environment as you pass by them at full speed would go a long way to making the game feel a lot faster than it is. But unfortunately, everything is drowned by the same looping engine noise. Surprisingly, there is voice acting in the game, though again, not a lot of it. They did manage to get most of the voices they needed from the film to come back, but overall each character only has about 5 lines total. Characters will call out when you pass them, and you can also taunt them with a dedicated button, but they're pretty limited and kind of annoying. Most of the lines are given to Watto and the announcers, who appear in some of the pre-rendered cutscenes for each race and comment for a little bit right before each race starts. These pre-rendered cutscenes can be rough sometimes, but they get the job done, and some of them even have these long shots which are surprisingly arty. I'm also convinced the Ice Map intro video has a statue with tits. I'm blurring it preemptively because I don't want to risk getting the video taken down, but I can't unsee it, they 100% gave the statue tits. For the most part, the commentary they give is pretty basic. I don't really remember there being any that were particularly memorable or funny, but the actors do a good job. What is burned deep into my brain though is the call out that happens when you beat your own lap time.
It's a new lap record!
I've been quoting that for almost 2 decades and I don't know why. The other lines that the game won't let me forget all belong to Watto.
You break or you buy, huh? Outlanders, they come here, how do they find me? Have you seen my chance cube? They come here, they look around, they no buy. Why nobody buy?
As well as the sound design feeling barren, the other issue is the music. There's no issue with the music, generally, because it's just the John Williams score from the film. I'm not going to play that obviously because I don't want to pull the tail of the Disney copyright to see whether it bites, and also because I'm willing to bet most of you know what the John Williams score sounds like. The problem is that it doesn't fit. I know that sounds odd, how can the Williams score not fit a Star Wars game? But the original scene didn't have music in it at all. Partly because the sound design alone was all that it needed, and partly because the scene was most likely inspired by Ben-Hur. So the music they used throughout the game is a mix of strings and motifs from the movie stitched together, as well as Duel of the Fates on a loop. The music from the other scene people remember the film for. The problem is that it just doesn't work. The tempo and feeling isn't really there because these tracks weren't written to be used like this, and to top it off, the mixing in the game is shit, so the music is muffled by the droning engine sounds. I know this is a Star Wars game, and not having an orchestral score akin to the films is pretty rare for these, but this is a racing game. Racing games need fast, driving tracks, and there needs to be a fair few of them to mitigate repetition. There are racing games out there whose soundtracks could prop up the game alone. It's an excuse to go wild. They were already borrowing from Wipeout's formula, so why not borrow the soundtrack styles? Does Breakbeat and Jungle fit the Star Wars theme? No. But it does fit the gameplay, so if there's a middle ground then that would be something to hear. I'd wager that since the game came out close to the movie, they probably didn't want the game to stray too far from what people expected out of a Star Wars product. But I'd respect the balls of a Star Wars game that tries to sound like Go. If you've made it this far and you want to play it, you might be wondering where to actually get the game, and that's a good question. When the game released, there were 5 versions of the game. The PC version I have here, as well as the versions on Mac, the N64, the Dreamcast, and even an approximation of the game for the Game Boy. It's shit. These were your only options of playing the game until, out of nowhere, 20 years later, a HD version of the game was released in 2020 for PlayStation, Xbox and Switch, though confusingly no PC port, which sucks because, like most games from the time, the PC version has become progressively more and more fucked over the years. Not too horrendously though. While I can't talk for everyone, on my machine the game works right off the bat, with some minor graphical glitches and the GOG version missing some cutscenes for some reason. So bizarrely, the most stable version of the game is actually the Steam version for once. If you have a console though, buy the game there. There's no competition. The textures are better, they remade the HUD, and the Switch version even includes a motion control option if you're one of those creatures. For the sake of authenticity to the version of the game I would have played originally, and the fact that I'm not about to drop money on capture hardware for consoles, I stuck with the original here. If you want to try the game for the first time, these versions are your best bet, since the changes are all basic visual ones. The gameplay is untouched, so don't feel like you're not getting the authentic experience. Limited Run Games even did physical copies of the game, as well as a reproduction of the N64 cart, which looked great, though good luck getting one now. This is on top of the fact that the original versions of the games had subtle differences already. There's differences in graphical fidelity, and some versions of the game are missing cutscenes and modes, but for the most part the game remained the same. Arguably the coolest version of the game though was the arcade cabinet, which looks like a completely different game. Unfortunately, I never got to try one of these out. I've seen people make the point that its connection to Star Wars is what boosted the game's sales to the height that it did. And yeah, of course it did. You could sell anything to kids in the late 90s and early 2000s, so long as you slapped a Star Wars logo on it, but the game does stand on its own merits in terms of its gameplay. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, as much as that title annoys me, is a solid AG racing game that can stand up to Wipeout and F-Zero, despite its rough edges and eerie lack of sound. Yeah, it's mostly nostalgia driving this review, but even then, Pod Racer still holds up for me. Maybe less nostalgia and more fear. the fear of time nipping at the heels. Because for one evening in the summer of 2004, sat in front of the phosphor glow of a CRT, Star Wars felt cool. One day I'll be in the ground. Or in a jar. Or, let's be honest, we'll probably have upgraded to Soylent Green by then. So while you chew on that protein bar that was once my frontal lobe, watching this video in cyberspace from the comfort of your underground pod, think of me. This game won't feel the same as it did then, but for posterity's sake it's something to at least acknowledge that it happened. An epitaph for how things used to be. So let it be known that Star Wars Pod Racer was, and is, pretty sick.